Good morning, one. Good morning, all. Good morning, Penny Ashton. How are you today?
Kia ora. Good. I finished all my weddings for the season, so now I'm quite relaxed.
For people who don't know, you're a wedding celebrant. So do you have nothing in your diary, or have you got people booking you up for like next summer?
Oh, I have some of that, yes, but I really have nothing in my diary because I just had something booked that was in April, but that's just been pushed out. May. I have some shows in May is the next thing that I have, which is very far away.
You said shows. Are you now talking about performing, or are you calling a wedding a show?
So you know what? Sometimes I do that. I'm like,
Yeah.
audience. It was a tough crowd.
I've got a gig this weekend.
Yeah. I totally refer to people. Sometimes I'm like putting on my costume. I did that once. I went to play indoor netball once, and I was like, "When's rehearsal? Where's our costumes?" It's like hilarious. This is a theatre show that is hopefully at Q Theatre. I did just get the funding from the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, though, because the fact it was supposed to be in February and it's been postponed. So I want to give a massive shout out to everybody that's working so hard to get money to events people and theatres and stuff like that. Has been really great. But it's been pushed out till May. And then the April one's been pushed out till like October.
Wow.
So I just hope that, Zeta screw us up doesn't do that with the next variant, etc.
Well, we're going to talk about that shortly, about the new Omicron variant. We're being warned about opening our borders. Also today, we're going to have a look at cost of living and supermarket prices. And Dr. Robert Patman, friend of the show, is coming on to talk Russia, especially because there was laws passed in New Zealand under urgency last night to enable the New Zealand government to put sanctions on Russia in various areas. So we'll cover that off as well, and maybe even get to a couple of other bits and bobs along the way. One question though, before we get into it, is as a wedding celebrant, what's the busiest weekend you've ever had? What's the most number of weddings you've done, sort of between Friday evening and Sunday evening?
I had actually this year between Friday and Tuesday I had 3, so it wasn't crazy. I've had 2 in a day before, done that quite a few times. But yeah, and one season I did 22 weddings. But you see, I tried to apply. I was applied to be a wedding celebrant 9 times in 12 years. They used to be really big dicks about it, and so I fought against it. And I think I may have had something to do with changing it. Like I threatened to go to close up, which was the thing at the time. And then suddenly I got it, and then not long after I got it, they really relaxed, and so then there was tons of new celebrants. Right. But I don't want to be like Paula Bennett pulling up the ladder after me or anything like that to complain about that, because it absolutely should have changed. But then that did really dilute the market a little bit. So I did 22 one year, but I generally about 10. So I'm not hugely busy. I would like to do more, but I have done a couple of 2 in one day, and one was on Waiheke, so that was a bit of a
wow.
Yeah. One was 11 o'clock in the morning, and then I had to get to Waiheke, so that was fun. That was my first ever day. 2 weddings in one day.
You just get the helicopter, isn't that what you say? The bride and groom. If you want me, it's the helicopter.
Yeah, that's the sort of caliber wedding I do. That's for sure.
Hey, let's get into talking about, I don't know, this. You might have heard of this thing before, Penny. There's this new thing going around called COVID. It's this new. Have you heard of it? It's quite new.
No. It's only fucked up my life for 2 years, but no, I haven't heard of it.
And there was a conversation this morning on breakfast with a guest. He's a Harvard epidemiologist, Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding. Yep. And he was talking a little bit about, maybe New Zealand should be a bit more aware of the dangers of opening up our borders. I think there are several international commentators out there at the moment who are looking to New Zealand, because we're an island, so we're a good case study, and looking to New Zealand, it seems, and saying, well, you guys are different because of X, Y, Z. Maybe you shouldn't quite do what the rest of the world is doing. And this guy seems to be one of them. But let's have a look at a couple of clips from the professor or the doctor. I want to bring this clip up. And the first clip we're looking at was he was on breakfast this morning, as I said, and he was basically asked, because the concern for opening up the borders is that there is sort of a new variant of Omicron. If you go and find this clip and watch it all yourself, you'll hear that he says that this new variant is so different from Omicron, it's almost like Delta to the initial infection, but it's still being called Omicron at the moment. And he was asked to talk about the difference between what's called BA1 and BA2, which are the 2 Omicrons at the moment. This is what he had to say.
The difference here with BA2, unfortunately, is that it is a very different lineage, I would say. I personally wouldn't even call it another Omicron subtype.
Right.
Because BA1 which is the regular Omicron, and BA.2 are more different than the Delta variant was from the original Wuhan strain. So they're very different.
Wow.
There's over a dozen different mutations that BA.2 has. And the worry is that it potentially has more infectious potential. And we're seeing that right now. In the UK, across all regions of England, BA.2 is now 50%. Cases are rising across all age groups, and hospitalizations are rising across all regions of England as well. And so this is where I think BA.2, it's about 30% to about double more contagious than even BA.1. And so that's the worry. That's the worry, that it's extending this Omicron wave. And again, I personally wouldn't even call it Omicron wave. I just give it a brand new name.
Anyway, then he comes back in, and the lovely John Campbell comes in quite shortly after this and says, as John Campbell is one to do in a lovely way, can we just reiterate that you're saying it could be 30% to 50% more infectious than the first variant of Omicron? Yeah, and anything when you add into there before we play the next clip, Penny?
I mean, God, it's just like, it feels like it's so infectious already. What is it just going to be? If you drive next to somebody, you're going to catch it next. I would say that
talking about it was enough to get them both infected. Perhaps.
Yeah. I think that Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, I've heard him before, and he's bloody marvelous. I just think he's awesome. I'm glad that we're tapping into people like that. But one thing he did say, John Campbell asked him last time he was on, why have you been surprised about how this has gone? And he was like, I thought that we would get a vaccine and then everybody would take the vaccine and everybody would wear a mask and it would be over. And oh, how they laughed. It was just like, because people are morons. So I love that guy. So more of him.
Well, speaking of loving that guy, and the vaccines, actually, it's a perfectly good segue. Thank you very much.
I'm good at this. No worries.
They were asking me about the vaccines, because the vaccines we have at the moment are obviously based on the original COVID.
The original strain. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's it going to be like for this BA.2? And he spoke to that quite clearly as well.
That's inherently a problem. The vaccines do work against BA.2 as well, but only if you have a booster. Just like the other Omicron, it is so different from Wuhan because the vaccines where we're getting are still the Wuhan 1.0 SARS-2 coronavirus. Is so different that without a booster, your 2 shots alone is only 10 to 20 to 30% efficacy against infection. And hospitalization is only 70%. But with a booster, you have about 70-80% protection against infection and 90% protection against hospitalization.
So look, I mean, that's what we need to share about there. Even though the efficacy is not 100%, he said 70 to 80%. That's a pretty good. That's compared to not any protection at all.
And that's against catching it, right?
Yeah.
That's against catching it. And 90% against hospitalization. As soon as I was eligible for a booster, I was like, put that shit in me now. And what I don't understand is these people that are eligible now who've had the 2 vaccines. So there's been negligible amounts in the total scheme who had adverse reactions. So there's a huge amount of people who did not have adverse reactions to the 2 shots who are not getting their boosters, and I don't understand. But yet I haven't understood so much of this whole situation. But I was lining up. And as I think I said this last time, I take 2 pills a day for epilepsy. I take 4 squirts a day for asthma. I have all sorts of shit wrong with me. So I'm putting stuff in myself constantly, and I say, bring it on. So, I mean, this is surely what we're going to have to get once a year, maybe every 6 months. And apparently they're about to release Omicron specific vaccines. So bring it on.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I had, we all laugh, and perhaps we shouldn't, but we all laugh when we see people saying they're not going to put that shit in their body whilst they're smoking a cigarette or doing whatever else that there is. And it's you think about swine flu, you think about bird flu. They came and they went. And it seems to me because the world, A, followed the advice, and B, the variants got less and less serious, and then it disappeared. This one, the variants are hanging around, and the people aren't following the advice. So it's like a perfect storm to keep this thing around forever.
It just shows the boredom threshold in the human race and the fatigue. We're all fucking sick of COVID. I love that when Jacinda said that with the regarding to the protesters, we are all sick of it and we are all over it, but yet we're not children. And just because we're sick of it doesn't make it go away.
Yeah. Look, also speaking to what you've just said specifically about how people are not following the medical advice. That's what you're intimating. I wanted to bring something into this conversation as well about how to speak to people.
Yeah.
And without saying, look at me, I've got all the answers, I've started doing something, and I'll show you what I do. And I think it's really effective to speak to people who are sharing spurious facts on the internet. The Facebook scientists. We had a computational biologist on yesterday who basically pointed out how important it was for us not to catch COVID if we could avoid it.
Yeah.
In that segment, and people can go to my Twitter feed and find the segment which I shared about 6 or 7 just headlines, but the headlines were stories with the research in them, talking about mild COVID can cause your brain to shrink as much as 10 years of aging, that there is a mass disability event coming because of it, long COVID coming in, cardiological issues coming in, all these other things that the so-called just a cold, respiratory issue are causing in some people. There we go. Thank you, George, for bringing that up. That's some of the things that have been coming up. And so what I did, people may criticize me for doing exactly what we're talking about other people doing, but I shared on Facebook actually the story, and I'm going to grab the screen back for a sec there, George. The story that George just shared, I shared this on a Facebook page, right? And I put a quote from it. Yes, I did put a little snarky comment, which was, just like a cold, not, because it's been a long time since a decent not joke has come out. I felt, Borat's far enough back that I think it's now retro to do.
You're the man to do it. Totally.
Thank you. And this is the quote from the article. Researchers identified COVID-associated brain damage months after infection, including in the region linked to smell and shrinkage in size equivalent to as much as a decade of normal aging. So you think about that hitting our elderly population as well, who are already in decline with their mental faculties. Like for those of us who might be already there, but for people who aren't, this is what I put up there, and I just put it up there and I just left it up there. Now I want to share with you some of the comments that came in.
Can't wait.
And I've actually redacted them because I haven't asked these people if I could share it. And I was like, I'm going to share them anyway, because this is what I've started to do, right? What I've started to do is ask for the evidence. So hopefully you can see that up the top. Someone came back to me and said, this is on that post I just showed you. One major side effect from the vaccine raised by a professor in Ireland was major cognitive issues, was also highlighted in Pfizer's 9 pages of adverse events. So my response is this. Can you cite the research for your claim as I have done? It's so important to have source material when someone makes a claim to sort out the fake data from empirical evidence. Cheers. This person has said back to me, certainly, sir, I will dig that up. Now, firstly, I haven't attacked them, right? As the first, I've just basically said in a very polite way, put your money where your mouth is, okay?
Absolutely.
And then within seconds, someone else put, they are preparing for the public for what is coming, but it will be because of the vaccine, not COVID. And so what did I do? I put in exactly the same message. Can you cite the research for your claim as I have done? It's so important to have source material when someone makes a claim to sort out the fake data from the empirical evidence. Now, the reason that's important is that second person hasn't come back to me at all. Well, it's not my page. I put it on a public page. The first person said they will come back to me, but there's every chance they won't. Or if they do, they'll probably cite a particular academic in Ireland who has been debunked a dozen times over. And I kind of know what's coming. And then I can say, well, actually, if you have a look at the research that they're talking about, here is where it's all wrong. So I know that people will think that it's that old adage of, if you know, no proof is needed, and if you don't know, proof is enough. But actually just saying to people, give me your research, show me where that information comes from, because most people are just basically passing on something that they read off someone else's Facebook page, and it serves no purpose. So that would be my encouragement to people.
Yeah, but I don't know if you change anybody's mind doing this sort of thing. You know, and so that what I just did was and this is obviously a public page, so that's different, but I've just deleted everybody that thinks like that. And I don't care about just having an echo chamber. I don't invite people that I think are idiots into my house. So I don't see why I have to do it onto my Facebook
For
feed.
sure.
And I'm not very good. Like, I'm not a good person to talk to insofar as how do you talk to people nicely about being stupid? I am not that person. So like, I'm not going to put myself like, when I try to teach my dad, he has a smartphone, but he only got it because we could sign into places. And trying to teach my dad about technology, I get ridiculously angry. It is unjustified how angry I get, going, just push that fucking button that I've told you 500 times. So I take my hat off to those people that teach older people about technology and things like that. So yeah, none of these areas are so I just acknowledge that I have failings in this area, and and just delete people, because I've gotten into, sometimes I can't help it. Matt's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm fighting with someone on Twitter just because I can't help it. But I think that sharing that stuff is so important, though, because particularly there's been a couple of things that have come out recently around the brain atrophy, and also around the fact that to recover to the right extent and not get long COVID, that rest is one of the most important things when you actually have COVID. So rest until you are completely recovered really lowers your chance of getting low COVID. And I think these things are so important to share, because these are new news items that will make people that can try harder to avoid being infected in the first place.
Yeah, and look, I tend to agree with you that I don't know if you're going to change any minds, but
yeah,
I am a firm believer in the old adage that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Yeah.
I will continue to try to lead horses to water, but you can't make them drink, and that's why I don't argue with people. I mean, I've said this on this show before, and also on my own podcast, that I often say to people, "Are you prepared to have your mind changed if they want to challenge me on something?" And if they say no, I go, "Well, thanks. I'm not looking for an argument."
Yeah.
If they say yes, I go, let's talk about it then.
Yeah. And I think I'm doing that less, definitely. Like, so I just started deleting people and stuff like that. There's no point getting into a big thing. But sometimes it's just like some outline. Well, Twitter can just do your head in, can't it? You're just scrolling through, looking at Twitter and just going, who are these people? And how do they possibly think this? And people that just hate Jacinda so much. Like somebody that says it's a girl in a skirt on a power trip.
Yeah,
like, yeah, what do you can fuck off. So yeah, but and it's like, what's the point in engaging with it? And I am better at it, but then just every now and then I'm like, all right, here I go, waging in. So yes.
I was thinking, isn't it nice that you're not on RNZ right now, so you can say to that person, if you want to fuck off, you can just fuck off.
Yeah, fuck off. Yeah.
You can just go away. If you're on RNZ, you can just go away. Just be your own.
Yes, I think I've still got quite a few complaints on RNZ from various other things, but I don't say fuck off, that's for sure. Yeah, I'm a very sweary person in real life, that's for sure.
So people should, I mean, I'm a big believer in sharing information, and I engage with people and I don't argue with people. And if people send me information, I typically will respond to them once. And normally, I said this to my 15-year-old in the last couple of days.
You've got a 15-year-old? Oh my God. I remember when you got married. Jesus Christ. Right.
I haven't. Okay. I'm 2 weeks away from an 18-year-old.
Oh my God. I've known you a long time. Right. Okay.
You were probably at my wedding, were you?
I was at your wedding.
St. Matthews. Yeah, there you go. We go back.
Yeah, St. Matthews. St. Matthews in the city.
I was saying to my 15-year-old just the other day that she's got some friends who are in families who aren't down with the vaccine, and I'm not critical of them right now. That's their choice and stuff. But what's been happening within the community, not just her friends, but that community, is they've been saying, you wait, 2 to 5 years, all the people taking the vaccine will be dead. These things, they're going to be magnetic. Wait and see. And what's actually happening is the opposite. The longer we get on, the more evidence is coming out supporting everything to do with the vaccine, showing all the dangers of COVID, and showing how now it's getting boosted, not getting boosted is actually far potentially more harmful than anything else to a sector of society. So actually all the scaremongering about what will come is actually going with the people on the side of science at the moment, not the people who are saying wait and see. So
yeah,
I think that's an interesting observation.
I just think, convincing people, they just find something else. It's like that mayor of Coromandel that's like, I will only take Novavax. And now we're like, here's Novavax. And he's like, no, I'm not going to take that. Yeah. So it's just, and I'm going to ask a serious question of you now, because you are quite Christian. I presume you still are. I don't know. You were quite Christian when especially at your wedding. And are these groups of people more predominantly Christian that are anti the vaccine, or am I just being biased?
Since I was on ZB, struggled with that word.
Christian?
The Christian word, yeah. And it's not because I have a problem with people identifying themselves at it. It's that I'm a effective and smart communicator. We'll be talking about how to be an ineffective and an unsmart communicator with Chris Luxon later on this hour. But I know, and I've read the research that says the word Christian is interpreted by between 75 and 95% of people to be changeable with hypocrite, judgmental, homophobe, all these things. Yeah. And so I'm like, because when I was on ZB, I was talking to 100,000 people a week. I'm like, why would I label myself with something that's going to put into someone else's heads their judgments and observations of me, when actually that's not who I am?
Which is kind of nuts too, because I'm atheist and I grew up and went to Catholic school, and that's what often sends one to atheism, I find. But I find it astonishing that, it's apparently in the States they did a survey and they said that they trusted atheists less than pedophiles.
Wow.
Like what? So it just, this association with all of it, it should just be about whether you're a good person. And I know that you don't judge other people for what they believe, which is the most fundamental thing. So that is nuts. That was synonymous with, did you say hypocrite?
Yeah, hypocrites in there, homophobes in there, judgmentals in there. I think there's another word which I can't remember right now, but between 75 and 95% of people respond and say that the words are interchangeable. So as a communicator and a broadcaster, like I used to get this on ZB, we're a bit of a tangent now, but we like tangents here. I used to get this on ZB a fair bit. Like I'd talk about something and people would send me messages saying, I thought you were supposed to be a Christian. Why are you talking about that? And my response to them was, you define what that word means to you, right? You define what it means. Yeah. And then I'll tell you whether I fit into your definition or not. Yeah. Because on one aspect, it means, the more money you've got, the more godly you are. That's literally a belief within that church. On another one, it means, all gay people are horrible people and there's a detriment and downfall of society. On another level, it means I do need to literally give the shirt off my back if someone else needs it. And if I was going to be associated with that word, I'd rather be down the end of giving the shirt off my back and that than the other end. But because you can't have a conversation with someone, I'm reticent to acknowledge that word for myself on a media outlet, only because people will interpret it their own way. So if you want to know what I am, I'd go, I think the teachings of this dude Jesus are fucking amazing. Look after the widows and orphans, put others before yourselves, be sacrificial, love your neighbor. I don't think anyone can ever challenge those teachings. And I'm down to be associated with those teachings. And however you want to do it, you fucking do it. Now, to your question, yes, there are a lot of people in the church world who have gone down the rabbit hole of this. And I don't know why. And it frustrates me more than anything because going back to what I just said about the teachings of this dude, JC, my mate had a t-shirt that was like, Jesus is my homeboy. I love that t-shirt. It was all about caring for others. It was actually about caring for others above yourself. There are many examples in that big dusty book where Jesus actually went, you know what? Under the law or under the rules of society right now, you're right to stone that woman to death. That's correct. That's what the law says. But hang on, what about you, fucker? What about you? What have you done that has broken the law that could also equal and stone to death? And if you've done nothing, sure, biff it, chuck her, stone her. But if you've done one thing that actually technically would be in the same place, you should probably leave her alone.
I know which parable you speak of. He without spin cast the first stone. So there we are.
So in that context, I kind of think about these, let's use the word anti-vaxxers, especially who are church associated. I kind of go, even if you have a religious, like objection to it, and if you accept the science, now there's a leap there that maybe they don't, but you accept the science, looking after the widows and orphans and the elderly and the vulnerable is actually the way your kind of boss man demonstrated more important on many levels than looking after yourself. So when I hear these arguments and when I hear these, pushbacks, and when I hear this, how dare the government and, all these sorts of things, I'm like, actually, your primary job is to look after the person next to you, and you fighting for your rights is the opposite of that. So when you say, are they Christian? I go, well, they're people who associate themselves with church, but they're not very Christ-like.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? Because that is the unfortunate delivering of the word hypocrite in association with Christian, because it's laid out in this book, and there's so much in that book that's nonsense. That's the other thing as well. Because it's that Chinese whispers of 400 years being written down, etc. So and that's the thing that I find frustrating. But I know that there's a lot of good that comes of it too. My mother is very big in her Anglican church in Christchurch, All Souls, and she's there all the time. And her MO is helping old lady. I mean, she is theoretically an old lady herself now. She's 75, but she just helps. That's what she does. She's driving old ladies to their doctor's appointments and sitting with them and spending time with them. And that's through her church. I mean, I think she would do it through whatever way she could find to do it, but for her, that's how it's worked. Anyway, we have gotten off the beaten track. But also, if you believe in God, then God's invented vaccines, because people invented vaccines and they were made in His image. That's what gets me as well. It's just trust the science. Anyway,
look, it's very clear within however you identify that religion. Some people call themselves Catholic or Anglicans or Presbyterians or non-denominational. They just use the word Christian or whatever. It's very, very clear that one of the cornerstones, in fact, there's a part that's talked about the great commandment, like over and above all the kind of 10 commandments, it's love your God with everything, which means, your beliefs are really important. Your connection to your beliefs are important, but love your neighbor as yourself. Basically, and there's a story there where Jesus got challenged, which basically said, but what's the greatest commandment? And that's what He said. So once you go love your neighbor as yourself, as soon as you start going, my rights, me, I, fuck you, you're outside the realms of what you've been told to do by the dude at the head of your organization.
Yeah, which is
why
the
CEO has said the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why the evangelical, particularly the American style that hasn't infected in ways into here as well, is so galling to me, who is deeply, deeply atheist. But look, two very fundamentally different beliefs getting on and having a nice time. Look at that. How strange.
But I think that's the thing is, and this is we're still tangenting about this, and that's fine. I'm happy to do that because we're about 2 minutes away from Robert Patman, so we've got a pad for a bit anyway.
Okay.
Is that actually Jesus was a lefty?
Yeah.
There's no question. There's no question.
Totally.
There's literally no question. So that, especially in America, as Crazy Old World is talking about fundamentalists, especially in America, where the right-wing conservative groups seem to have taken ownership of that faith, it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong. I mean, he told people not to hoard money.
Yeah, totally.
He told people to give stuff away. He healed people and didn't give them an invoice afterwards. All these stories point towards a radical leftist kind of person. Now, if this figurehead was here today, I'm not saying he'd vote for Democrats or Labor. I don't have who knows, but certainly the ideology he espouses, and also the practice that he demonstrated and told others to do. Certainly, if you look where the political spectrum is today, I mean, if I just said to you, look after the widows and orphans, you immediately think of the left rather than the right. So it just seems that it sits there better.
Yeah. The right's like they should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. That's what they should do. So it feels like Brian Tamaki is a big camel just really trying to get through a little eye of a needle, and it's just not working out.
But what they do, he talked about, they make up their own stories. It's called motivated cognition, back to the previous conversation. And the Christians do it too. I mean, they've come up with this story that, what you're talking about is it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven, which means it's impossible. Now, the fundamentalists somewhere along the way made up a story that the eye of a needle was actually a gate in the walls of Jerusalem. And so that's now popular belief amongst some people who want to be incredibly wealthy. And it's not true. It's simply not true. There was no gateway that was the eye of the needle. The actual literal interpretation, well, not that's a literal, is that it's impossible for a rich man to get into heaven.
Wow. Which I don't necessarily agree with, but obviously I don't agree with anything, but that is some real jiggery pokery, isn't it? All right.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they did. But just to wrap, the thing we're talking about, and we talk about this a lot on the show, is called motivated cognition. What you're talking about when they change their idea, and it's a theory or it's a research practice put out by a guy called Stephen Lewandowski, where you have a position and a conclusion, and you believe your conclusion no matter what. If someone provides you evidence in between that to say opposite, that disproves it, you just find another way to the same conclusion. Motivated cognition, and it happens in all aspects of life.
It's like a rat trying to find cheese somehow.
Yeah, speaking of rats, no, I was good. That was I don't know. I wasn't going to say anything after that. I was going to actually bring someone in, and that would have been inappropriate. Hey,
Yeah.
let's have a catch up with George. George is the producer and behind the scenes here. We're waiting for Robert Patman to join us. We'll give him a couple of minutes, and if Robert doesn't join us in a couple of minutes, we'll move on to talking about cost of living and supermarkets, because there's a really interesting look. I'll show you this, Penny. Are you a driver, or are you a public transport person?
I'm a driver.
What are you paying for fuel at the moment in Auckland?
$3, I think.
Yeah, here's something I don't understand. And George is not a driver or even a car. Let's see, this is an app called Gaspy, Gaspy.
Uh-huh.
And what it is a database of petrol prices, and it's operated by the users. So you go to a petrol station, you look up Gaspy, you find the cheapest one, you go there. Pardon me, but if the price is wrong, you can then change it and everyone else sees it. In Dunedin at the moment, can you see that? That's Dunedin. $2.69.
Right.
$2.69. Why is Dunedin 50 cents cheaper than Auckland?
Yeah, I mean, is it $3? Because I'm not even 100% sure about that.
But that's Dunedin, $2.69.
Yeah, but what is Auckland? Can you look it up? Because I don't 100% know. Yeah, because I've been going nowhere. Because all of my work is cancelled. In fact, my husband, so he was a draftsman for 30 years. He worked in the, and I don't get that, because it has to get all the way, like, is it all coming? It's all coming from Marsden Point until this week or something, right? Is it?
I guess
stopping?
So. Certainly not coming from Russia, is it?
Yeah, so why that? Yeah, and that does, because I knew that often in more remote places it's usually more expensive. So that is bollocks, because Dunedin is remote as fuck. Let's be honest. But if it's coming from Marsden Point, it is very annoying. But back to my husband, draftsman for 30 years, and has just had this massive. I don't like to call it a midlife crisis, because that feels negative. I'd say it's a midlife epiphany. That he really hated his job, and so now he just started yesterday, 2 days ago, working at a bike store. So he's cycling to work. So that's 30 Ks there and 30 Ks back, because it's in Cleveland, which is freaking miles away. So he's cycling 60 Ks a day to get to work. It's only taking about an hour each way. And he is going to get an e-bike now at cost, because he's working at a bike shop. So he is the perfect example of someone who's really committed. He hates driving. I'll caveat that. Hates it. And doesn't actually own a car. So that makes it more difficult to drive when he doesn't have one. But and he's loving that. And he'll do it in winter. This is when petrol doesn't bother him, and e-bikes are the way of the future.
Yeah, I've been looking at a few e-bikes as well.
I've got one. I love it.
What I did in Auckland before I left was I had a Vespa. I don't know if you remember my Vespa, but I had a Vespa, and I used to blast around on that. And whilst it was still 200 cc, so it did 110 down the motorway. It wasn't. We're not talking the same fuel prices. And I've constantly said I would like to reinvest in a Vespa at some stage.
Yeah, and Matt had a scooter for a while, but he hates being on the roads. So that's why, and so we're both quite big cycle advocates, and I can get very angry about people. They either bitch about cyclists on the road, they bitch about money being sent on cycleways. It's you can't have one without the other, fuckers. So figure it out. And also, he's been hit a couple of times on his bike, and I've been knocked off my bike and stuff as well.
Hey, well, listen, we have Professor Robert Patman with us. We'll bring him in to say good morning. Good morning, Robert. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning.
Very happy to have you back with us today, especially because there's such a lot going on at the moment with Russia. This is Penny, in case you guys haven't met officially face to face. There was obviously legislation change last night, passed under urgency last night, to give the government the ability to put these sanctions in place and to have some consequences towards some Russians and the Russian government from New Zealand. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I mean, I think it was a welcome step. By the way, Pat, my voice is repeating back to me.
We've got you fine on this end.
Is it still, because it did it the top? No, it is a bit, yeah.
You're hearing it come back to yourself, Robert, are you?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Shall I start again?
Yeah, let's start again. We are live streaming right now, but we'll cut the clip and it'll look beautiful and no one will know we've had this conversation. So let me ask you the question again as well.
Sure.
Laws passed under urgency last night. The New Zealand government did that. I'm interested. I'm assuming, I haven't looked, it's probably my bad, that was passed unanimously. But obviously that gives the government the right or the ability to now place sanctions on Russia and also some Russian individuals. I think there was a list of 100 in particular. The floor is open, sir. Would you like to speak to that?
Sure. I think it's a welcome step. The New Zealand had initially wanted to work through the United Nations, but once it became apparent, I should say, that the Russian representative in the UN Security Council would veto any measures deploring the invasion, then that no longer became an option. And unfortunately, the UN Security Council is dysfunctional. It's not just Russia vetoing its invasion of a neighboring country. It's also, we have other countries like China and the United States vetoing anything that goes against their interests or their perceived interests. So in a sense, I think this episode, the fact that New Zealand has had to develop a special sanctions bill, shows that the UN Security Council at the moment is not fit for purpose. It is ludicrous that the body that was set up to deal with peace and security cannot take concerted action where there is a blatant violation of the sovereignty of a neighboring country, Ukraine, from Russia. So I think it's high time that, if nothing else, this crisis must, I think, add momentum to the reform of the United Nations.
Mm.
Do you think it will?
You want to ask? Yeah, ask Robert.
You think it will?
I think it will, but we won't get it unless we ask for it. Lots of people say, oh, the UN, the US will never give up its veto. But France and Germany will never give up the veto. China, they won't if we don't ask for it. I'd like them to go and explain in front of the other 188 members of the UN Security Council why they need a privilege that no one else has. At the moment, that is, a two-tier system. It's a top-down system. It may have worked immediately after the Second World War, after the experience of a 6-year war, but at the moment, we have a 1945 organization trying to deal with the challenges, the security challenges of the 21st century. It's not fit for purpose. And to New Zealand's credit, it has always opposed the veto, and whenever it's been on the UN Security Council, has tried to take steps to constrain the use of the veto. But I think the middle powers and the small powers, which are the vast majority of countries in the world, now have a golden opportunity to press their case for serious constraints or limits on the use of the veto. And the reason I say that, why is there an opportunity? Because so-called great powers can't unilaterally, if great powers could solve the problems that face us, like COVID-19, climate change, if the United States could wave a magic wand and get rid of climate change for the rest of the planet, we might say, oh yeah, they deserve a veto, but they can't. And China can't. All these problems we face, which don't recognize borders, like climate change, COVID-19, transnational terrorism, problems of the economy, global economy, basically we need an international organization which can deliver authoritative international responses to what are international problems. And at the moment, we don't have that. So we do actually, need to move towards that.
Do you think that China and Russia would listen anyway?
They wouldn't listen and they would ignore it. But I think you can't allow two members out of 193 states to effectively stymie international will. And my point is that I think a head of steam amongst the smaller and middle power countries needs to develop. There's lots of things that look impossible. If you were a black American in the 1950s, civil rights may have looked pretty impossible.
Yeah.
And they didn't just get it. They struggled and worked for it. Now we have to struggle and work to remove this absurdity where the most dangerous situations in the world can't be tackled because one of the members of an elite group of 5 decide it's not in their interest. That's so just not good enough.
This would be to impose sanctions that would have real and meaningful effect as a global economy.
A credible international organization which is set up to maintain peace and security should be able to act with great speed when one of its leading members invades a neighboring country in a blatant violation of sovereignty, a blatant violation of territorial integrity. And at the moment we have a situation where they know they can get away with it.
What I hear you saying as well, Robert, is the idea of being almost aspirational, not to use kind of a a word that's going to be on a meme later on today. But when we had the Greens on talking about their policy of affordable quality housing as a right, it was explained very clearly to me by Julian Genter as it's because I was like but what if it's affordable but not quality, and what if it's quality but not affordable? And she was like, but it's what we want to do in 10 years from now. It's like, and she actually brought up a civil rights issue as well. You wouldn't have thought that would have happened in the 1920s or 30s or 40s, but it was something to be aspirational for the future.
Yeah,
I think about those veto rights. It's like, if China did ignore them anyway, at least that would be a line in the sand.
At least make the Chinese ambassador to the UN explain why his country needs that exclusive right that no one else has, and also the United States, the British, and also France, as well as Russia. You often don't get unless you ask. And the fact of the matter is, this is a major and international problem, and people are tiptoeing around it. I think many small and middle powers, our country included, have always taken the view that we should constructively, quietly use quiet engagement to try to solve this problem. Well, it hasn't achieved very much, and I think we do need middle powers and the small countries to realize they do have some leverage in this situation. They can, as they showed with the General Assembly vote on Russian invasion, they can exercise some, influence in this situation. And at the moment, we're just sort of, if you like, staggering from one international crisis to the next, because the UN, the body established to deal with peace and security, basically is left as a bystander.
Do you think you go, Pat?
I was just going to say, you're talking about middle-sized powers, and you reference us. The sanctions.
I think we're a minor power.
Middle and small. No,
I think we shouldn't overestimate ourselves. Of course,
that's what I was going to ask, Robert. What I was going to ask is,
nor should we underestimate ourselves. We have a government which has won a lot of international recognition for the way it responded to the appalling terrorist atrocity in Christchurch in March 2019, and also, despite the protesters in Wellington, an international recognition that we handle COVID-19 as well as anyone in the world. Yeah. So that's won us a lot of soft power, but we act well with other countries. And I think a good precedent or example of how we've done this was after the Christchurch terror atrocity, Jacinda Ardern got together with Emmanuel Macron from France. And, the history between New Zealand and France hasn't been all that comfortable. But they got together because they both agreed that online extremism had to be curbed, which is a sort of, incubator for some of these extremist ideas, which generates this terrible terrorism. So I thought that was a great example of a small power getting together with a middle power. They were getting no help at all from the Trump administration, which opposed curbing online extremism. And they went ahead and they got more than 50 countries to sign up. And guess what? The new Biden administration, one of the first things it did was support the initiative that a small power and a middle power took. And I do think, we can act as a bit of a playmaker. We can only work with others, but we are a multilateral, sort of internationally minded country. And I think a lot of countries want to see more from New Zealand in certain situations. Yeah. And no one expects us to do anything unilaterally. We can't do anything unilaterally, but we can work cooperatively and we can provide leadership in ideas.
Yeah, this is why I get frustrated when people criticize the Greens for trying to make change and to bring in climate change stuff, going, we're just a little country at the bottom of the world. And it's like, if everybody says that, nothing changes. So same thing.
But that's not how the rest of the world see us. When I've been in Europe, people fall about laughing when you describe New Zealand as a small state. It's just, most Europeans will respond, it's the size of Denmark in population and also Norway in population terms. Your land space is bigger than the UK's. You've just got a small population relative to the land space. So I do think because great powers can no longer solve our problems for us, we have to step into this leadership void which currently exists in the world. And I don't mean we in the sense of taking over. I mean that we can contribute to this. one thing I think is really important, Pat, talking about the Ukraine crisis, which is a terrible crisis. It's a tragedy in the 21st century. After all the experience of the terrible wars of the 20th century, that we're witnessing wholesale human slaughter again. But I do think we should be not just taking a sanctions stand, contributing to economic. I think we should be collaborating with other countries to issue an international declaration. This could be a diplomatic initiative, a bit like the Ukraine call, if you like, in which the small and middle powers get together and issue a statement to the Russian people, not to the Russian government. Putin's authoritarian regime is not going to take any notice of anything we say, but a lot of Russians are very uncomfortable, and I think even those that support the war effort need to hear a message from New Zealand and many other countries in the world that their government's behavior in their name is totally unacceptable and beyond the pale and must be stopped. We can do these sort of things together with other countries. So I do think that we shouldn't undersell our position.
Do you sidebar question that I have been thinking about, because Putin's been slowed down, all this sort of stuff. If there was, and through the sanctions and all that sort of stuff, if he did have to back away, would he not be the most horrendous wounded bear, Russian? What would he do next?
Well, that's the really big question, isn't it, Penny? He's already wounded.
Yeah.
The reason he went into the Ukraine partly was to bolster his regime, his authoritarian regime at home, which is under enormous strain. But it's turning out to be catastrophic, as some of his military critics within Russia predicted. He got warnings from some elements of the Russian military not to do this, but he went ahead anyway. And their casualties. Yeah. The point is, he has absolute power, and he does not have unvarnished or independent, robust advice given to him. So many of his advisors are terrified of him. And so it's difficult, in short, he's existing in an information bubble. But you know what? He's created this crisis. He's going to have to deal with the consequences of it. And I don't buy into this argument, we've got to find a face-saving way out for President Putin. This is a very repressive regime in Russia. The most effective political opponent is not allowed to run against him and was poisoned and is now being incarcerated. And while this invasion is going on, he's quietly handed him another 15 years incarceration. So my view is that Putin is wounded. The best way out for him is to withdraw his troops as soon as possible. That, of course, will cost him his regime. But that's the price you pay. He's had a good shot, doesn't he? He's had 22 years in power, president or prime minister, and he clearly hasn't got a monopoly of wisdom. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made the decisions that he's made in relation to Ukraine. I mean, one thing that's quite clear to me is that Mr. Putin and some of the people around him have dangerous delusions. For example, the speech he gave before he went in, where he insisted that the Ukraine was not a legitimate, independent, sovereign country, and that it was a Russia creation, and that Ukraine occupied ancient lands. Well, if anything has become clear since Russia invaded Ukraine, is that Ukraine, does not ever want to be under Russian control, and is fighting like mad to avert that possibility. And you couldn't get a more spirited resistance from across the whole population. So what worries me is that someone in a position of such power actually entertained that thought.
And this whole Nazification, I mean, the propaganda is crazy. And then now saying that America's putting in chemical weapons to the Ukraine is obviously setting it up.
It's fairy tales. It was a fairy tale that led them to invade Ukraine. You have Mr. Lavrov saying, hinting in an interview with Al Jazeera just a few days ago, that he criticized Mr. Zelensky for entertaining the possibility of going towards nuclear weapons, developing nuclear weapons. And that is a caricature, because what Mr. Zelensky said, or President Zelensky said, was that they gave up nuclear weapons on the understanding that Russia would respect Ukraine's territorial integrity under the 1994 agreement. That was the deal. The US, UK, and Russia promised to recognize the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. Well, that agreement has not been honored. And what Zelensky said was they would not be doing this if we still had nuclear weapons. They would not be invading our country. And maybe we should get them. He said that provocatively, but the interesting thing to me is that the foreign minister of Russia is clutching at that to say that's why we're going in. We can't have a country with nuclear weapons next door to us. But the only reason he floated that idea is because Russia has had 190,000 troops mobilized around the borders of Ukraine for the last 6 months. So he's causing, he's confusing cause and effect, basically.
Yeah.
Hey, last question, Robert. Now, we're getting a bit of feedback there as well. I can hear that coming through to us again. But let me ask this question.
Sure.
Because when you're speaking, I'm not hearing it. So we'll ask this question and you can go for it. With all the arms that are pouring into Ukraine, all the arms, the volunteers from around the world, we heard about a New Zealander who put on his boots and gone. We spoke to a guy yesterday who's a podcaster in the UK, former army, and he was talking to his wife about should he go. His wife said no, and he said, what if it was in France? And his wife said, well, of course. So obviously there's people are talking about going and joining the situation there as well. Is there a risk from all those volunteers and arms flooding in that this could make the situation a lot worse and a lot longer, thinking Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, that sort of thing?
It's a difficult question. I think it will certainly complicate the situation, but let's be quite clear about this. Mr. Putin is responsible for invading a neighbor. He can't call it a neighbor. He can't call it an invasion. State media in Russia calls it a special military operation. Anyone who calls it invasion or a war can face up to 15 years in jail.
Wow.
Having established that, I'm not, having established the fact that, the Putin regime is responsible for this crisis. Yes, volunteers going there. But I think, to be fair, Pat, I think a lot of people are moved by the terrible images they're seeing of a country which has been left on its own and is getting basically pummeled. Missile strikes on civilian areas.
Maternity hospitals today.
Yeah.
On a
absolutely. And I think a lot of people feel this is just not fair. This great big power is unleashing its military arsenal against a smaller country. It's not that small. It's got more than 45 million people. And they want to do something. But I do think the potential of something like 16,000 volunteers are already in Ukraine. I don't blame Ukraine for wanting these people to come. If you've got a back against the wall, you got your head under the water and you put your arm up, you're quite happy if someone grabs your arm. So I think, they're desperate and they are really under the cosh. I mean, Mariupol, there's a terrible situation you're just referring to, Penny, the bombing of the maternity hospital. People there haven't had any electricity or water for 5 days through continual missile strikes, which the Russian ambassador to the UN insists that Ukrainians are responsible for, that the Ukrainians are launching missile strikes against fellow Ukrainians. So this is more fairy tales. I think, to answer your question as concisely as I can, I think it would be good if the people volunteering were carefully screened before they left. That is, they went with the consent of the governments they're going from.
Right.
But I think it only adds to the possibility of the conflict spilling over. Particularly, for nearly 2 million refugees have now entered Poland. It's estimated that 5 million may heading towards Eastern Europe within the not too distant future. The thing we know about conflicts, with the best will in the world of trying to limit the conflict to just the territorial space of the Ukraine, it could easily spill over. Somebody could make a mistake. Wars never go according to plan. And that's the one thing you can predict about them. So my concern is not just the volunteers going there, which will complicate things and might make particular situations worse, but also the potential this conflict already has for spilling over. And I think then let's be quite clear, NATO will get involved once that happens. If there's any incident involving some of the NATO members bordering Ukraine, whether the Baltic states or Poland. Yeah.
Poland is NATO, right?
Yeah.
Or is it not? Yeah.
Hey, we need to move on, Robert. Thank you so much for your expert advice and thoughts again today. We love having you on, and we look forward to having you on again.
Great pleasure. Thanks, Pat.
Have a good day staying away from those
Penny.
COVID-filled students, and good to be with you again.
Thank you.
Robert Patman from University of Otago. A couple of messages that have come in. The UN is only one structure that needs reforming, but what about how countries just ignore the international courts, e.g. Russia not showing up, China ignoring South China Seas? Does international law exist? I guess we'll take that more as a comment. That was a question for Professor Patman, but there you go. And another question, another comment, just a nice one from people who are tuning in. Hello from China. Hello, Lubo.
Oh my word. Hello.
Yeah. Nice to have you on board. Yeah. Every day, every weekday we're on at this time, Lubo. If you want to jump on board and hear thoughts and share thoughts, we're welcome to have you. Now, people, do I have
time to make a comment at all about things?
You sure do.
When I was in Czech, I went to the Communist Museum in Prague, and it was so harrowing. Like, they have a place in Prague called Self-Immolation Square because it's where everyone set themselves on fire to try and end communism. And you just kind of go, if a system of government requires such totalitarian control and such murder and people setting themselves on fire, maybe it's not the best. So you can see why the Ukrainians are leaving rather than be under Russian control, which is supposedly rooted in this ideology, but isn't. It's all about, now it's like, I never say oligarchs and all that sort of stuff. And anyway, I just thought the Self-Immolation Square would be enough motivation for people to leave Ukraine.
Yeah. Hey, we just talked about Lubo and China. Lubo asked another question. Probably would have been better to address this to Professor Patman, but it's what we're all talking about, really, which would be not necessarily cheaper, but which would be more effective. Economic sanctions for years, or quick war with Russia, killing Putin, destroying their disinformation infrastructure. Look, I think, to be honest with you, my perspective on the world and life and people in general is armed conflict is always the absolute last option, because no matter what you follow, and I'm not saying therefore we leave Ukraine to be the Ukraine, but no matter what you follow and how many Geneva Conventions are involved or whatever, it's unquestionable that people get caught up in it, innocent people die, and it should always be the absolute last. To me, it looks like sanctions are kind of working at the moment.
Yeah, and also like
doing their thing.
Look about America and Afghanistan. Like, it's not necessarily quick, and you might blitzkrieg it, but then what follows? This is what happened to Alexander the Great. He conquered all the way across the world, but then didn't follow it up, So you have a battle and you win, but nothing comes after you. What happens then? So I don't know. I just feel I don't know if that no one can answer that question, obviously, but for me, it's always that's the worst and last case scenario, and we saw it with America's war on terror and how the West was behind it at the start after 9/11, and then within a few years you could see how it was just decimating and destroying innocent people's lives through the Middle East. And so I looks like the sanctions are working. I mean, what's happening in Russia at the moment with their economy is crashing. If they don't have the money to drive these things at the moment, a lot of the Russian people I saw on one of the news channels in the last couple of nights are thinking they support their president 100%. And that's because they're being given the wrong information. They're being victims of the propaganda campaign going on. That can only last so long. So at the moment, as hard and horrible and desperate as it is to watch people in Ukraine and cities in Ukraine suffering what they're suffering, I think that especially with nuclear,
that quick war is an impossibility to even fathom, because war is probably, if you think about chaos, war is probably the most chaotic thing you can do, and to control it by considering it to be a quick one. I mean, we all remember George W. Bush's mission accomplished banner, and they were still there 15 years later. So
ask the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki how they feel about solutions like that.
Hey, should we spend a couple of minutes? We are coming up to midday, but should we just do this one on the supermarket prices? Because I think it would be interesting to have a look at. We've already touched on it today with gas prices, but supermarket prices are and cost of living in general is going crazy. I read this today. Bernard Hickey was on, I think, One News this morning, TVNZ Breakfast this morning, and it was reported that the two major supermarket chains in New Zealand made last year $430 million in what they called excess profits. So profits they didn't need. So they basically made $400 million in profits, and then they made another $430 million in profits on top of that.
And that's with reference, to like what the rest of the world usually does, right?
Yeah.
Because how can you know what is blah, blah, blah? But with reference to how
to Bernard Hickey, who talks about some of the percentages that, and I guess he's talking about around the world, that it's expected that places like supermarkets can make. And this is what he said this morning.
That's right. The Commerce Commission estimated what a normal supermarket group should be charging in profit, if you like. And it turns out they are twice as profitable as they should be. Their returns are about 13%. They should be closer to 6.5%. And that's $430 million a year, according to the Commerce Commission.
Yeah, that we're paying. The people watching are paying.
So there you go. That's pretty much the succinct answer to what we just talked about. So, there's two parts to this, and this is why I guess the Commerce Commission needs to come and maybe government needs to be involved, because you talk about a business selling widgets. If they can make 13% rather than 6%, fine, go for it. Make your 13% over 6% because I don't need to buy your widget. Yeah. However, bananas and milk, you kind of need. There's that whole survival and food thing. And that's why it feels like government could and should get involved to regulate what's going on and go, you guys are making already literally hundreds of millions of dollars profit. Yeah.
Especially because they were one of the few, during a pandemic, they made so much more money than they had previously. And I was a little bit like, this feels like a wet slap with a bus ticket to what came out yesterday. I was hoping for a lot more because this duopoly is bullshit. It's bullshit. And the way that they squeeze their suppliers and stuff as well. And it is a fundamental human right to be able to afford to eat. And the thing that's most galling is, of course, the stuff that's cheapest is the stuff that's worse for everybody. So there are people that are already having poor outcomes for their health because of their living environments, who can't afford to eat as proper with fruit and vegetables and things like that will help their health. And so it's this endless cycle of bullshit around poverty and people not giving a shit because they want to make as much profit as possible. So it makes me angry. Can you tell?
And like I said, if you're making widgets, something that I don't need, then go get on your mat. Go on your mat. You need widgets you don't need, so be it. If I don't need your electric scooter and your electric scooter costs 10 grand, but you could sell it for 2 and people are still buying it, fuck, more power to you. No problems at all. But when we're looking at, we talk a lot about people's health and people's eating and people's access to food and our rights, and that's the difference. And
same with power companies and water companies and all of that.
And that's the difference. And we were talking a bit yesterday about it. We'll bring George in to wrap up the show as well. With George, we were talking about this yesterday, George, when I kind of said, I'm a bit torn because if I start a business and that media empire took over all of Dunedin, is someone going to come in and say, no, look, there's got to be fair competition? It's different. You don't need to ingest media content. You do need to ingest food. So that's in my mind over the last 24 hours. That's the way I've kind of gone. You can see how this needs to be addressed in a fairer way, and government can be involved.
People on the right, when it comes to economic policy, we can convince them that there's intervention is needed because this isn't even really free market, is it? If there's a duopoly and no competition, then the principle of free market capitalism has gone out the door as well. So, intervention, I think, is when it comes to people's livelihoods, definitely.
And I have a different example, is that I live in West Auckland, which is in the licensing trust area, which I hate with the passion of 1,000 burning suns. We have a monopolies commission for a reason, but somehow this freaking licensing trust, who pretends to give all this money away, but they do not give anything away, the percentage of what they earn. And they've spent a long time building up property empires. And so I have to pay more money for booze and have the worst pubs that are these epic boozers filled with pokey machines, which they also has almost the same name as the licensing trust. So when people think they're getting funds from the licensing trust, they're actually getting it from the gambling machines. And they do that on purpose to deceive people, basically. So that's an absolute crystallization of how a monopoly ruins the options that are on offer. Everybody that works in the bottle stores, I hasten to add, are delightful people. They're all very nice. And the bottle stores have come a long way, even since the pandemic. Like during the pandemic, you had to order what you wanted online. No, you couldn't order online. You had to do it with an email or a landline, and you could only get 3 different types of beer. You got wine in in dollar amounts rather than the wine that you wanted. You had to get a white wine that was worth between $10 and $15. So this was the bullshit that you get on offer when a monopoly is involved. And funnily enough, I would like it to be in the supermarkets. So there's even more. I don't even care about the supermarkets, actually. I care more about the shit bars, that they're just awful booze barns. So anyway,
let me check this up there. I mean, we got to hear other perspectives, and this is not necessarily disagreeing with what we're saying, but Emperor just makes an interesting point. If supermarkets reduce their prices further on fresh items, it will kill off what little of groceries and butchers still exist. That's an interesting thought. I mean, one of my clients here in Dunedin is a grocery store that I do work with in their marketing and advertising, and they're the sort of cheapest in Dunedin. And they're 10 to 15% cheaper than Pack and Save, which is the cheapest supermarket in Dunedin, on their groceries. If Pack and Save dropped their prices by another 10%, then maybe they wouldn't exist anymore. And so it's at least an interesting point to throw into this conversation.
It absolutely is. I am somebody who loves convenience, I have to say. So that I actually had started getting the home delivery. And because I decided that it would be a better way to actually keep because when we bought a house, it was like, okay, so we need to be concise with, how much we're spending. And it's easier to do that when you're sitting there and you're not tempted to buy this cake or this thing while you're actually walking around. So I love that notion of buying everything from one place. And obviously groceries and butchers is different that way. But yeah, it's a very valid point.
You should, if you're in West Auckland, you should check out Clark's Organic Butchery over in Glen. What's the name of the place?
Eden?
Over by Swanson. Glen Eden, over in Glen Eden, and they do home deliveries, because we used to get them when we were up there, and you can get like $150 pack, might be more than that now, and it's almost a month's worth of food. If you make it work, if you're a butchery, Clark's Organic Butchery, not sponsored the show, but lovely people. Hey, let's just also share, because the Prime Minister was asked about cost of living specifically, as opposed to supermarket prices, which obviously all goes in. And let's just have a listen to what she had to say about cost of living in 60 seconds, because this is the thing that we haven't talked about yet. We're all rightfully so up and up. That's a terrible frozen picture of the Prime Minister.
Yes, it really is. I was thinking
until I come back. We're all in support of Ukraine completely, but then again, we talked about it earlier. If you're paying $3 at the pump, one of the reasons you're paying $3 at the pump is because of the war in Ukraine. Because we're putting sanctions on Russia. We're not taking their fuel anymore. We're taking their oil anymore. And it's going to cost us as individuals. And I wonder how much blowback the government's going to get for the price at the pump when the same people are going, but we support Ukraine. Like, what are we going to end up doing? So let's just go back to that terrible frozen image and let the Prime Minister talk for 60 seconds about the cost of living in general.
We are deeply concerned about the impact, as we've already seen. Globally, we're in a place where economic recovery from COVID, supply constraints, and now the war means that we have a perfect storm that everyone is experiencing, and New Zealand is not alone in that. So we are of course, looking to the changes that are coming in on April, the increase in the family tax credit, the increase in the minimum wage, we've got the winter energy payment coming. All of those will help with easing the pressure, but we continue to think about what it is we can do to particularly support low and middle income earners during this time.
And of course, it raises the obvious question. Christopher Luxon had his State of the Nation message in the weekend. One of the first things being said is tax cuts. We're obviously in a climate right now where revenue for the government, which is actually revenue for us and running our country, is needed. Offering tax cuts, where are you cutting it from? What is not being paid for now in a time where
which he didn't say, right?
Well, he said it was going to come from the $6 billion spending, but didn't say what part of the spending wouldn't be done.
Exactly, and also the people that need it most were going to get the least benefit.
Yeah,
it's like $2 a week or something.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and I think she made. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think she made a good point. The thing is, I'm getting sick of everybody saying that it's like it's just happening in New Zealand. It is happening all over the world. Inflation is rampant all over the world because of all of the same global pressures that we are feeling as well. And I think I get sick of people saying we shouldn't put up the minimum wage because X, Y, Z. I'm like, fuck off. The minimum wage is ridiculous in this country. It's better than Saskatchewan. In Saskatchewan, it's $11 an hour.
Wow.
Isn't that shit? Anyway, so I think things like that are good. But obviously, I think that the government could have done more around various other things around housing, etc. But thankfully, the housing market is slowing down massively, it feels like.
Would appear so. George,
at a rate of knots.
Yeah, it's a shame, right? The sanctions against Russia are going to affect everyday people, not just in Russia, but here in New Zealand with the, I think of and I've been talking to lots of colleagues about this, about the 1973 OPEC oil crisis, basically when OPEC stopped giving oil to the world. And the people that suffered were everyday people. And it actually sort of, sort of was a catalyst for new political movements and new sort of populist movements against, because basically the rich continue to do what they do. And it's the everyday people that are going to, suffer from these sanctions in the West. I mean, I know that the purpose of the sanctions at Russia is to damage oligarchs who are allies of Putin, and that seems to be working to a certain extent. But yeah, here we're seeing these effects and are going to, have to deal with them.
Yeah, and it's easy for me to, I'm fine with it because I don't travel that much. I'm fine. Like, I'm financially comfortable enough to absorb that and feel good about doing that. But that's very easy for me to say because I don't have 2 cleaning jobs at opposite ends of Auckland and 6 kids and all that.
And it's not just going to be at the pump, right? It's going to be supermarket prices are going to be affected by this. I'm going to say something deeply, deeply superficial, but I am always trying to find the right shade of red hair dye because I like things that are extreme, so they keep being discontinued. But I had just found a woman in the Ukraine who sold this color. Like, I got that from her and I was excited. And so, as I said, it's deeply superficial. It's just like one example of something that is directly affecting me because of this fucking moron Putin. And, and that's just one tiny thing. And it's going to be all over the world, just so many different things. But on a personal, superficial, I feel almost horrible saying it, but I'm very sad that I can't give this woman, I want to give her more money. I mean, I haven't actually, I should contact her, just like with the Airbnb thing, and say, can I still buy these from you? Like, even.
And the ultimate irony that a bald man does none of that to you, mate. That's just the nail in the coffin. He doesn't understand the importance of hair dye, does he?
No. And I recently bought a butterfly for my house. That's like a rusty iron butterfly that's from Russia. And now I want to take it back. I want to go, ooh, no, I don't want that anymore. It hasn't arrived yet. But I'm like, that's the thing about the global economy. We're so connected now in ways that we never were during World War II and stuff like that. And it being beamed into our house every night, the actual physical, and just to see the lies. It's such a different landscape now. And I think that sort of affects how we react to it too.
This is the problem with trying to get rid of the veto powers in the Security Council, is our connection with China, and also our, how we sort of, hitch ourselves to US foreign policy.
Less so
it's good. It's good to see Robert Patman optimistic, but those powers giving up veto power would need a totally different organization, I think, and that's sort of what I think he's getting at, is that medium-sized powers and little powers might need to, because that's how change comes, is out of big, huge crises and antagonisms like this. So, but yeah, I think you'd need to actually absolutely destroy the United Nations, because at the end of the day, the majority of its resources and political support come from US foreign policy. So, you'd need to have a fundamental reset of it.
All right, guys, we're going to leave it there because we're a little bit over. That's all right, because we can. Penny, thanks for joining us today, mate. As always, legendary conversations. I hope you enjoyed it, especially with
I can talk, that's for sure. Yes, he was very delightful.
Yeah. Well, that's what we do. Also, George, thank you, sir. We'll be back. George and I will be back tomorrow with Jeremy Elwood at 11 a.m. to have a chat about the biggest news stories of the day. And so until then, y'all, we thank you for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow. Hooroo.